Hello, my name is Ashley Scott Myers. I run the blog and podcast Selling Your Screenplay. Today I'm talking with Andrew Mark, who's a screenwriter out of Colorado. Taking notes and then implementing those notes is one of the toughest things we do as screenwriters. So I thought it might be interesting to document a conversation that Andrew and I had after he received some notes back from the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. I read through the notes and tried to offer my suggestions on how he should approach this rewrite. So hopefully those suggestions can be helpful to others as well. By watching this, maybe it'll give you some ideas about how to attack your own rewrite after getting notes back. Andrew bought our script analysis 3-pack, and he used the first 2 analyses for this first draft of the screenplay, and those 2 analyses are what we're going to talk about in this video. You can download and read the actual analysis from the website. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultant. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultant, and then just look for the section that has the example notes to download. So here's our conversation. I hope you find it useful. Welcome, Andrew. You have recently purchased the script analysis service through Selling Your Screenplay. You've gotten your notes back, and now we're just going to run through them. So maybe to start, you can kind of just give us your, even just a gut reaction of how you thought the notes were, and then we can dig into some of the specifics of the notes and how you're going to go about approaching this rewrite on your script.
Sure. Well, initially, I was excited just to get a word back. So oftentimes you put your work out into the ether and you kind of hope for the best, and you get no response, which is always disheartening. But now that I have had 2 honest reviews about it, one was a little more complimentary than the other, but even just an honest appraisal of what we were looking at and if it works as a screenplay or not is a helpful tool. And, I'm exceedingly grateful for the service at large because, like as a creative type, you think you have all of your, I's dotted and your T's crossed, and you think you are, hitting on all cylinders, and then basically you're writing in a vacuum and you have no decent critique. I mean, you can give it to your friends and your family and be like, read this and tell me what you think. And, because, you're such a special person in their life, they're like, oh, this is, Hemingway, this is Shakespeare. Like, oh, well, they like it, then other people might like it too. And then to have, industry professionals come back and give you an honest appraisal is the most helpful tool like any writer could ask for.
Yeah. So I read over the 2 analyses you got. One of your readers was Arthur, and one of them was Bobby. I definitely thought Arthur was definitely a little harsher, but I thought that basically a lot of the things that they said there was a lot of commonality amongst their notes. Arthur was just, as I said, he was a little less sugarcoating, I think,
Sure.
And maybe just a little harsher. But I felt like there was a lot of overlap in what they were saying, and I think that's actually a good sign. If you get 2 opinions and they're vastly different, then you're kind of at a loss to do. But if you get 2 opinions and there's some overlap, then you can kind of say, well, maybe this is an area to actually go ahead and approach.
Yeah, it gives us something to focus on.
Yeah. So maybe you can just talk about sort of some of the specifics in the notes and what you thought. And if you have any questions for me, I don't mind answering any of the questions either.
First off, one of the helpful things I found about the critique was they were very meticulous. Both reviewers were meticulous about grammar and format. Which as, an inexperienced writer, especially in screenplay format, it's helpful for people to go through and actually, point out this should be like this and these are unnecessary things you're putting into it. Like, writing your first few screenplays, you're just kind of grabbing bits of information from classes you've taken or seminars or reading other screenplays, and you're trying to find your voice as well as something that translates to the industry. And when I started seeing how both of them had the same opinion about how I was formatting it. I need to take another pass at that and clean that up. And then another similarity that both of them had was, lacking a protagonist, and not having someone to root for. And it made me, really with outside perspective, go back and look at it and see if I translated the characters the way I wanted to. And then there's discrepancies where Bobby liked one thing and Arthur didn't like that thing, and so it was trying to find the middle ground of what can be modified or changed to appease both reviews. So it's a little bit of cherry picking, and it's a little bit of just kind of tipping your hat to the experts and saying, they both agree on this, and one agrees on it, and one doesn't. So trying to blend all of those opinions together is my next challenge.
Yeah. And I would say this is probably like one of the hardest things screenwriters do is get notes and try and figure out how to actually attack those notes. But the things you just mentioned are exactly the things that I wrote down as well and highlighted in the critiques. I mean, obviously there's some formatting, spelling and stuff, and that stuff is actually, that's easy to do. We can also go back and get another analysis where someone just goes through and just really gets those out. But I wouldn't recommend that until you've got all the other things worked out, so you're not constantly having to, redo the typos. But that stuff, the formatting, typos, that kind of stuff, that stuff will be easy to work out once we get some of the other stuff. The biggest issue that I saw was what you mentioned, was the lack of a protagonist, and a lack of someone to root for. And, even though it is a sort of a campy horror script that you've written, in most cases, and maybe not all cases, and Bobby kind of even mentioned this, he said, well, maybe it's just kind of a campy horror movie, and so maybe you're okay. But I kind of agree with Arthur. I think, and Bobby was basically saying the same thing, is you need to settle on a protagonist, and you need to come up with a character arc for that protagonist, because that journey is really what gets the audience behind it. And in every case, I'd be willing to bet the movies you like, in every single case, popular movies that are successful, they've got that character that you can get behind. And it doesn't always have to be someone that you completely like, as in like The Sopranos, where it's a guy doing terrible things. But there's aspects of his life that you like and you can kind of relate to and follow along with. And just having everybody kind of be, the mean and nasty bad people in a horror movie that we know they're going to get killed eventually. And I guess there's something to that, just rooting for these terrible people to get killed. But I would say that's probably the biggest thing that these notes uncovered. And that's not an easy note to handle, because, it means going back and kind of figuring out how you're going to fit that character in. But I think that's the key.
I would prefer a well-defined note like that, as opposed to something that is more innocuous, like it needs to feel this way, or it needs more tone or tenor of this thing, or something that was a little more vague. But I really think that when you black and white so definitively say, like, this needs a stronger protagonist, we need someone to root for, I think that's an easier fix. And I'm very excited to tackle that. See, my idea with the script was that the ghost was the protagonist and not the antagonist. You wanted to root for the killer, and so that's how I was trying to break the formula. And maybe I failed at that. Maybe it wasn't strong enough, creating a bond between the audience and the ghost. But I think it's pretty apparent.
That doesn't strike me as a terrible idea. I think then you've got to spend some time, and you're correct. I haven't read the script yet, but you're correct. Then you got to just spend more time with that little girl as she's going through her thing, and the audience has to get on board with that and make sure that that's where you're seeing. When do you realize that it's the ghost that's doing the killing?
I think you notice it right away. I mean, it's you just don't necessarily know how she was eventually murdered, and that's kind of uncovered in the third act, that it was the pageant mom and stepdad and stuff like that were involved. So, like, it's her. I mean, I don't think there's any question about it. At least I hope there's not.
And maybe that's one thing that you got to do. Maybe it's not a mystery. Maybe that's front loaded, where you explain to the audience that she was killed in a pageant and now she's coming back to get revenge, and get the audience behind her. The other thing that makes a ghost a tough protagonist is, in almost every case, if it's a real person, that person can like sit down and talk to their wife or their friend, and that's a way of getting out sort of some of the backstory and some of the interior thoughts of that character. And so if you just have a ghost sort of drifting around, showing up, it becomes difficult to relate to that character just because we don't really know what's going inside. If there was, I'm just throwing out ideas, if there was two ghosts, this girl and maybe another ghost trying to pull her to heaven or something, and then they could have some dialogue throughout the script that kind of uncovered some of those motivations and backstory, then I think we can kind of get into her head a little bit more and be relatable. Because I don't think that doesn't strike me as a bad idea, having the ghost be the protagonist. Because it does kind of break the formula. It's a little bit, it'd be like if Michael Myers was the protagonist in Halloween.
Right.
And that's kind of a cool idea, actually.
Like if all the babysitters he was killing were bad babysitters, and he had a bad babysitter situation in the past. But but if both of them missed it, clearly I wasn't hitting the mark. So I guess I can bump up like the sympathy for the killer and kind of give her, like you said, front-loaded motivation, and so that we're making it. I thought I made it clear that everyone in the script was bad and awful, and so like the only person left to root for would be the ghost because everyone was just so deplorable. But this is all workable notes. This is not a. I don't think this is a lot of heavy lifting for me.
Yeah. And I'm a fan of the Blake Snyder Save the Cat books, and his whole thing, that save the cat moment, is like an important moment in the screenplay at the very beginning, to have that moment with your protagonist that, the person does something noble or does something that the audience can kind of get behind. And you see that so often. Ideally, you'll tie it into the main A story, but that's a very sort of important thread. Having that early scene that defines the character and gets the audience on board with that character.
That's doable.
And as I said, Blake Snyder, he literally calls it save the cat. You have a character save a cat, and most people are going to think that that's a really, nice thing to do, and everybody loves animals. And so, saving an animal is something that will get us sort of on board. And doing it early in the script is important so that we get on board early with that character and can kind of follow that character. And as I said, I also don't think having like two ghosts might not be a bad idea, where we can get some dialogue between them and understand what her sort of motivation is and what her goal is. That's the other thing. And Bobby, and I think Arthur mentioned this, the arc is important, and maybe her flaw at the beginning is she is just, obsessed with revenge, and maybe she comes to learn that revenge isn't the answer or isn't going to make her happy, and so she drifts off to heaven at the end. Something in those things. But then again, you've got like an arc to go with. You've got a journey. You've got a journey that the audience can kind of follow with this character. And having another ghost might be a good way to get some of that internal conflict sort of out of her head.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I guess I would just I'm going to mull the two ghosts over around. I would have to conjure one up at this point in the script because
and it may not be a good idea, but the important thing is getting that journey. Every protagonist in a movie has a journey, has a change. Like even in the most shallow, if it's a good movie, even in the most shallow movies. Indiana Jones, he starts out as a skeptic. He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in superstition. And at the end, he does believe in God. He tells her to close his eyes. And that's his arc. So it's like you really have to have something like that the audience can kind of get behind and see that change. And even in a character, in this case, who's dead, is going to have that change. And then is going to drift off to heaven. And that could be a cool moment. Like that's a cool moment at the end if she finally has that moment where she comes to peace at what's happened and then drifts off to heaven, much like in something like Ghost. You get that moment where the characters have changed and have gone through that metamorphosis, and that makes those endings, those climaxes very, very fulfilling. So the two ghosts thing may not be a great idea, but having an arc and understanding what the flaw is and how this character's change and what that change actually represents and how you show that, I think is important. The other thing, they both mentioned the dialogue, and again, this is probably not a hard note. Bobby, I think he said, I highlighted, sometimes the characters rely on sort of corny lines that progress the story. I think Arthur made a similar thing. And one thing that I've done with my scripts is I'm in a writer's group where you get together and a bunch of actors read through the script, kind of a staged reading. And that might be something for you to do. You live in Colorado, correct?
That's right. Denver.
So yeah, and so I'm in LA, so it's easier for me to find actors, but you don't necessarily even need great actors. You can get your friends, get even 3 or 4 friends, and they can read multiple roles. But if you have one person read all the narration and then the other people play different characters, just hearing the dialogue can make a world of difference, and it's not a huge investment of time. I mean, you can find some friends to do it, and so there's no real money. You just get together in your living room and read through it, and that would be something I would recommend giving it a pass. Once you've got like the protagonist stuff worked out, and then so that would sort of be my steps. Figure out the protagonist, figure out the typical thing is figuring out what his flaw is, because if you have a flawed protagonist at the beginning, then the story is him overcoming that flaw, and you get that nice character arc. And if that flaw is something we can relate to, then the audience can kind of get behind, and this character becomes very relatable. And as I said, that would be the first note that I would attack. Then I would attack some of these other lesser things like the dialogue, getting the dialogue polished up, doing what I said, and then once you finally got sort of a draft that you really like, then go back and we can get you another script analysis where it's just formatting and typos, and then weed that out, and then move on to the email and fax blast.
Do I have room to beef it up a little bit?
How many pages is it?
I think it's 90 or 92.
Yeah, I mean, you not a lot. If it's 100 pages, you're okay. You don't want to go much past 100 pages, and shorter is better on a low budget type of a movie. It just means less days of shooting, the less page count you have. So the one other note that I think, and this was when I first opened the script, that very first page is just like a long block of text. It's a couple of paragraphs, and one of the readers at least mentioned that breaking things up and trying to really condense, make your writing as lean as possible. A script I highly recommend is the 40-Year-Old Virgin. If you go read that script, and I have it, if you go to sellingyourscreenplay.com, you can download the script. If you look at the script, don't even bother reading it, but if you just look at it visually, it's like super lean. And I can tell you, as someone who reads a lot of scripts, when I opened your script, my heart sank because there's just so many words to have to go through. And like, look at something like the 40-Year-Old Virgin. It's super lean. There's dialogue, lots of white space on the page, and you can whip through that script. I'm a slow reader, and you can read that thing in like an hour. And it's like readers are going to look at this, and their heart's going to sink because they're like, the underpaid, overworked reader, and they're going to see a ton of words on the page and just be like, and that's going to predispose them to not liking the script. And one of the people did mention that, so I would definitely say that's another note. Yeah, exactly. Lean it up, man. The less is more with screenwriting, for sure.
All right. I did not know that. I mean, I've seen so many scripts where, like, every little detail is, just described. So, yeah, I mean, if I can get away with less writing and, get the dialogue across and punch out the visuals, I can do that.
Yeah.
That's much better.
For sure. Yeah. So
that is good to know. Do you think that I made the supplemental characters too deplorable, and maybe I should back off of that in the rewrite and kind of make them a little bit sympathetic so you feel bad when they do die? Is that another idea?
Yeah. I mean, some of it's a personal taste thing, but that's not what I would probably like. A movie like this, a lot of the characters they're gonna die, and you want the audience to kind of be happy that they're dying. And I'm trying to think of an example of this. But it's usually like the teen horror movie. They got the really bitchy girls, and they're going to get killed, and you're kind of glad. So I don't think necessarily the antagonist, the people that are gonna die. I don't think we necessarily. I don't necessarily think you need to back off of that as much as, because that was. I almost think that was one of the strengths of the script, was both readers did mention that the characters that do get killed, they are very much they're deplorable characters, and so you kind of want to see them die. And I think that's fine. I don't think that's a big deal. I mean, they have to be somewhat understandable. They can't just be completely crazy where we don't understand. It's just the old story. The best villains in film are villains that have some sort of a point of view that we can understand, and sort of in their own, like in their mind they're not crazy or evil. In their mind they're the good ones. But something that makes it it grounds them and makes them understandable. So maybe you need to make them a little bit more grounded. But I don't think making terrible characters that we want to see die, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
So I mean, the one thing it was. I think his name's Richard Walters, the famous UCLA screenwriting professor. I went to a seminar that he did once, and the first piece of advice he gave was, it's like, make me hate you, make me like you, but never bore me. And that's, again, I think that's one of the strengths. Both these characters really felt like these bad people were really despicable, and that's good writing. Like, even an emotion of dislike is an emotion, and as a writer, that's what you're trying to do, is evoke emotions in people. So I think that's great stuff. Make the audience really hate these people, as opposed to just not care about them. If they're poorly written, that's the death of a script, when they are not, when they don't care one way or another. It's just like, they don't like them and they don't hate them. If they hate them, you've actually created some genuine emotion in the audience and the readers, and that's a good thing. It's a long-winded answer, but I think that's probably how I would go. Let me just read through. I highlighted some of the stuff. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. As I said, the dialogue was something that both of them mentioned, so that would be something. And then the typos and the protagonist. Those are really the only three, I would say, major notes. Just those three things, and that's how I would attack it. Get the protagonist and his character arc, figure out what his flaw is, weave that into the script, make it his story so that we understand, it's through his eyes, it's his point of view. Get that in there, and then go back and tweak the dialogue, try and make the dialogue a little crisper, and then fix the typos, and then I think you'll be in pretty solid ground.
Awesome. That's great. I will get to work on that right away.
Perfect. So that's my conversation with Andrew. Hopefully you found it interesting and potentially helpful for your own rewrites. As I said, implementing notes is one of the hardest parts of being a screenwriter. But like everything else in life, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. So that's my one last piece of parting advice. Get a lot of notes on your first drafts of screenplays, and then dig in and try and address those notes. And sometimes it takes several passes at the same material to get it right. I know this is tough and I know it's hard work, but this is what we must do as screenwriters. So if you'd like an analysis on one of your screenplays, check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultant. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultant. Thank you for listening.